The bells of St. Aldwyn's Cathedral rang with a solemnity that felt less like celebration and more like judgment, their iron throats tolling beneath a sky the color of old pearl. London gathered as it always did when a powerful man made a public choice, but the crowd's attention clung not to the Duke of Ravenshollow, whose name alone bent rooms into silence, but to the woman walking beside him, her gloved hand resting lightly on his arm, as if even touch were a matter of negotiation. She moved slowly, not from fear, but from an instinct learned too early. Never appear eager before those who wait to measure your worth. Her gown was ivory satin, cut with severe elegance, its train whispering against the stone floor like restrained breath. A veil softened her features without hiding them, and in that transparency lay the first cruelty of the day. Every face could see her clearly. Every thought could be imagined. They whispered her name with curiosity sharpened by disbelief. Some said she was fortunate. Others said she was purchased. No one said she was loved. Ladies hid judgment behind fans. Gentlemen assessed her as one might assess land newly acquired, wondering what value could be extracted and what flaws might soon appear. The Duke's expression was carved from restraint. Tall, dark, immaculate. He bore the ceremony as one bears an obligation long anticipated and never desired. His jaw was set, his gaze forward, acknowledging neither the murmurs nor the woman at his side. He had mastered the art of distance so completely that even in marriage he seemed alone, as though intimacy were a language he had elected never to learn. To the watching world, this union was a correction of fate. A woman of dwindling social leverage elevated by the hand of the most powerful duke in the realm. A solution disguised as romance. Yet beneath the lace and ritual lay a quieter truth, felt only by the bride as she crossed the threshold into the cathedral's echoing nave. She had been chosen, but not cherished. She remembered the night the offer came. Not a proposal, not a confession, merely an arrangement delivered with immaculate courtesy. His study had been lit by a single lamp, shadows disciplined into corners. His words had been precise, his tone unyielding. Marriage would secure certain estates. It would silence inconvenient speculation. It would restore balance. It would, he assured her, be conducted with respect. Love had not been mentioned. It had not been required. She had accepted because refusal would have been louder than consent. Because women learned early that survival often wore the mask of compliance. Because dignity, when stripped of illusion, sometimes meant enduring what could not be changed. That night, alone in her chamber, she folded her private hopes away like letters never meant to be sent, sealing them beneath calm resolve. As she approached the altar now, her pulse steadied rather than raced. Shame, she had learned, burned hottest when resisted. If met calmly, it dulled into something manageable, almost dignified. She lifted her chin, allowing the chandelier's light to strike her face fully. Let them look. Let them weigh her. She had survived worse reckonings than this, endured quieter humiliations in smaller rooms where no titles softened the cruelty. The vows were spoken with reverence and restraint. Her voice, when it came, surprised even her with its clarity. She did not tremble. The Duke's words were flawless, practiced, carrying the authority of a man accustomed to oaths that bound others more than himself. When the ring slid onto her finger, it felt neither cold nor warm, merely final, a circle drawn firmly around her future. Applause rippled through the cathedral, polite and measured, a sound of approval without affection. Outside, carriages waited, their polished doors reflecting the new duchess's image back at her, multiplied and distorted. As the Duke guided her forward, his touch was correct, protective in appearance, distant in truth. He did not ask if she was well. He did not need to. She sensed already the shape of her days to come. Long corridors echoing with formality. Formal dinners conducted like negotiations. Conversations edged with caution and expectation. A household trained to observe her as carefully as it obeyed him. Servants who would learn her habits before learning her heart. A husband whose silence would be praised as strength. A wife whose stillness would be mistaken for gratitude. The title would be hers. The voice would not. Yet beneath that quiet acceptance stirred a question she dared not name, wondering how long such silence could endure. It was then she heard it. A whisper, carelessly cruel, spoken just loudly enough to wound. He did not even look at her. Another voice replied, softer, almost pitying. Why would he? She was never meant to be loved. The word struck not as a blow but as confirmation. She had known this. She had accepted it. And yet, something shifted within her, a quiet resolve hardening like steel beneath silk. If she was to be unloved, she would at least be unbowed. As the carriage door closed, sealing her into her new life, the Duke finally turned his head. For the briefest moment, his composure fractured. His gaze met hers, searching, unsettled, as if he had heard the whisper too, and recognized its truth more deeply than he ever intended. The Duchess learned quickly that silence could be ornate. Ravenshollow estate spoke in gestures rather than words, and the Duke, its master, communicated affection through acquisition. On her first morning as his wife, a velvet case awaited her upon the breakfast table, positioned with deliberate visibility. Inside lay a necklace of pale diamonds, each stone cut to catch light without warmth, exquisite and impersonal. He watched her receive it with the measured attention of a man observing the success of a strategy, not the pleasure of a gift. She thanked him as protocol demanded. Her voice was composed, her smile precise. The necklace was clasped around her throat by a maid who trembled slightly, as though aware she fastened more than jewels. When the Duke inclined his head in acknowledgment, the exchange was complete. No words followed. None were needed. The household understood the language. Generosity stood in place of tenderness, luxury substituted for intimacy. Days unfolded in a rhythm dictated by custom. She learned which corridors echoed least, which servants spoke only when addressed, which rooms belonged to memory rather than use. The Duke moved through the house like a figure carved from intention, appearing at meals, councils, and events with faultless punctuality, then retreating into absence. He never touched her beyond necessity. His gaze rarely lingered. Yet society noticed what he provided, not what he withheld. Invitations multiplied. Ballrooms glittered with anticipation as the new Duchess of Ravenshollow entered on her husband's arm, her gowns flawless, her posture serene. Chandeliers flared above her like interrogations. Women measured her worth against the splendor of her attire. Men speculated in lowered tones about her origins, her obedience, her supposed good fortune. The Duke danced with her once each evening, precisely once, his hand firm at her waist, his expression unreadable. When the music ended, he escorted her to a seat and left her there, perfectly displayed. Gifts continued. A winter cloak lined with sable. A carriage upholstered in midnight blue. An emerald ring heavy enough to remind her constantly of its presence. Each token drew admiration and quiet envy. Each widened the distance between what she appeared to possess and what she truly lacked. Gratitude became expected. Silence became misinterpreted as contentment. She played her role with grace, though every ornament felt like a boundary drawn more tightly around her. The scandal arrived without announcement, as such things often do. It began as a murmur at a supper she did not attend, spread by a woman eager for novelty and sustained by men who found speculation diverting. A letter, it was said, had been seen. A past connection implied. Nothing concrete, nothing provable, only implication sharpened into rumor. The Duchess noticed the change not through accusation, but through pause. Conversations faltered when she entered rooms. Invitations arrived later, phrased more cautiously. Eyes lingered with a new calculation. She waited for the Duke to speak. She waited through dinners conducted in careful politeness, through evenings spent opposite one another like dignitaries from rival nations. He did not ask if the whispers were true. He did not deny them. He merely observed her with a new attentiveness, one edged with evaluation. His silence, once merely cold, now felt perilous. At a gathering hosted by a rival house, the rumor found its voice. A remark, cloaked as concern, floated across the room. The Duchess felt the heat of attention converge, felt judgment sharpen like glass. She met it with composure, answering questions that were not questions, smiling where defiance might have been expected. Across the room, the Duke stood immobile, his profile calm, his eyes fixed not on her, but on the speaker. He said nothing. His restraint was praised as dignity. Her isolation deepened. That night, alone in her chamber, she removed the emerald ring and placed it upon the table. For the first time since her marriage, tears came unbidden, not from heartbreak, but from exhaustion. She had accepted indifference. She had not anticipated abandonment in the face of dishonor she had not earned. In the quiet, she wondered whether this was the true cost of power, to be protected only when convenient. The following day, another gift arrived. A brooch, antique, its crest unmistakably his. The message was clear enough to others. She remained under his name, his protection. To her, it read differently. Protection offered without trust was merely ownership refined. She pinned it to her bodice when required, feeling its weight as both shield and shackle. At the next assembly, the rumor shifted. It no longer questioned her virtue alone, but her influence. Was she ambitious? Manipulative? Had she secured her position through deception? The Duke was questioned obliquely by men who pretended loyalty. He answered them with cool assurance, defending the sanctity of his house, not the character of his wife. The distinction did not go unnoticed. As the evening waned, she found herself standing beside him beneath a painted ceiling depicting triumph and surrender. For a moment, the crowd receded. She spoke quietly, her voice steady despite the storm gathering behind her eyes. "You need not defend me," she said. He turned, surprised, as though she had broken an unspoken rule. In that brief pause, something unsaid pressed urgently between them, waiting to be acknowledged or denied. Night drew the estate inward, folding its grandeur into shadow until Ravenshollow felt less like a fortress and more like a confessional. Rain traced the windows in slender, insistent lines, tapping softly as though asking entry. The Duchess stood alone in the library, a room seldom used except for records and law, its shelves tall and severe, its air scented with dust and old leather. She had not come seeking solitude. She had come because something within her had finally refused silence. The Duke entered without announcement. He always did. His presence altered the room immediately, as if gravity itself recalibrated around him. He removed his gloves with methodical precision, setting them aside before speaking, and in that small ritual she saw the man he was when unobserved, controlled, deliberate, armored by habit. "You wished to speak," he said. It was not a question. She turned to face him. Candlelight softened her features, but her eyes were clear, unguarded in a way they had not been before. "No," she replied quietly. "I wished to be heard." He studied her, a flicker of surprise crossing his expression before discipline reclaimed it. "You are always heard," he said. "Within reason." "That," she answered, "is precisely the difficulty." Silence settled, dense but not hostile. The rain deepened, wind pressing harder against the glass. She stepped closer, not in challenge, but in resolve. "I have borne the whispers," she said. "I have accepted the gifts, the distance, the interpretation of my quiet as compliance. But I will not bear your doubt in silence." His jaw tightened. "You mistake restraint for doubt." "Do I?" Her voice did not rise. "You defend your name with admirable efficiency. You defend your house with unquestioned loyalty. Yet when my character is dissected in drawing rooms, you offer nothing but composure. You let them believe you are indifferent to the truth." "I am indifferent to gossip," he replied sharply. "It has no authority." "It has consequence," she said, "especially when your silence grants it permission." He turned away then, pacing once across the length of the room before stopping beside the window. For a moment he looked every inch the man the world believed him to be, unyielding, solitary, untouched by sentiment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, edged with something unfamiliar. "You do not understand the danger of appearing vulnerable," he said. "Affection is a weapon, once displayed." She did not retreat. Then why marry at all? The question struck with quiet force. He faced her slowly, as though unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. "Because necessity demanded it," he answered. "Because order required correction." "And I was the correction," she said, not bitterly but plainly. "Yes," he admitted. The honesty cost him visibly. And more than that. She waited. "I believed," he continued, "that distance would protect us both. that if I kept my regard disciplined, the world would have nothing to exploit. I did not anticipate how closely indifference resembles cruelty. The admission altered the room, loosening something long held taut. She felt it, the shift, like the first deep breath after confinement. "You have never asked me who I am," she said softly. "Only what I would endure." His gaze held hers now, searching, unsettled. "Then tell me," he said. She spoke of small things first, of the weight of expectation, of learning early to survive on composure, of how humiliation learned in private prepares one for judgment in public. As she spoke, the rain softened, the night listening. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. When she finished, her voice steadied by relief, he said quietly, "I did not intend to diminish you." "I know," she replied. "But intent does not erase effect." He nodded once, as though accepting a verdict. "There was a time," he said after a pause, "when I loved without restraint. It was costly. I buried what remained and vowed never to offer such leverage again. In marrying you, I believed control would suffice." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "I find myself fearing that my control has already failed." The confession lingered between them, fragile and exposed. She felt the urge to reach for him, resisted it. Some distances, once crossed, could not be reclaimed. A knock sounded at the door, sharp and insistent. A servant's voice followed, urgent. "Your Grace." A summons from court. Immediate. The Duke closed his eyes briefly, then straightened, the mask returning even as something behind it remained altered. He looked at her, truly looked, and in his expression was a question he did not yet dare ask, and a promise he was not yet ready to speak. The court assembled beneath a ceiling painted with victories long past, its gilded figures frozen in triumph that felt strangely hollow in the present hour. Light spilled through tall windows, fractured by stained glass into colors too rich for the tension they illuminated. Courtiers gathered in disciplined clusters, their murmurs restrained yet electric, each glance sharpened by anticipation. This was not a celebration but a reckoning, and everyone knew a life could be redrawn here with nothing more than a nod or a word. The Duchess stood at the center of that attention, her posture immaculate, her hands folded with deliberate calm. She wore no jewels save the emerald ring, its presence a calculated defiance. Her face betrayed neither fear nor appeal, though beneath the composure her pulse moved with steady insistence. She had learned that dignity, when displayed without permission, unsettled those who expected submission. If she was to be judged, she would not arrive diminished. The Duke stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the tension held in his frame, though he did not touch her. His expression was controlled, but no longer impenetrable. The night before had altered him in ways no public chamber could conceal entirely. He was aware now of the eyes upon him not as admiration alone, but expectation. Silence, his long-time ally, waited obediently at his command. Yet it did not comfort him as it once had. The accusation was presented with formal courtesy, phrased so as to appear concerned rather than condemning. Questions of influence, of propriety, of whether the Duchess's presence had been obtained through means unbecoming her station. Each word was chosen to wound without overt bloodshed. The room listened with practiced interest, as though attending a performance refined by repetition. She answered when permitted, her voice measured, her responses concise. She denied nothing she did not know to be false. She offered no unnecessary defense. Her restraint unsettled the assembly more than protest would have. She felt the Duke's gaze upon her now, steady and intent, as though watching a truth he had never fully considered unfold in real time. When the questioning paused, the silence that followed felt deliberate, almost staged. All eyes shifted toward the Duke. This was the moment they anticipated. The expected response hovered in the air, a reaffirmation of order, a distancing remark, a sacrifice neatly executed in the name of stability. He had done such things before. Power often demanded it. He moved then, not forward, but downward. The gesture was subtle at first, a lowering of his head, a bend at the knee that rippled confusion through the room. Gasps scattered like startled birds. Before anyone could interpret the motion, He knelt fully, the polished floor bearing the weight of a man unaccustomed to yielding. The sound of it echoed louder than any declaration. He bowed his head before her. The court froze. No one spoke. Even breath seemed suspended, as though the room itself strained to understand what it witnessed. The most powerful duke in the realm, a man whose name commanded deference, had chosen humility in full view of those who thrived on hierarchy. He rose slowly, turning to face the assembly, then looked back at his wife. His voice, when he spoke, was steady but altered, stripped of calculation. "My silence," he said, "has been mistaken for judgment. Let it be corrected now." He addressed them all, yet his words seemed anchored to her alone. He spoke of honor not as inheritance, but as conduct. Of loyalty not as possession, but as recognition. He named her integrity with clarity that left no room for interpretation, claiming responsibility for every distance he had imposed and every assumption his restraint had allowed to grow unchecked. "She stands accused," he continued, "not because she has erred, but because I failed to defend what I had no right to withhold." His gaze lifted, sweeping the room. "If there is fault to be answered, it is mine." The weight of his admission shifted the air. Power, when confessed rather than wielded, unsettled the structures built to depend upon it. Faces hardened. Others softened. No one interrupted. He turned to her then, and the formality of the court seemed to recede, leaving only two figures exposed beneath history's gaze. His voice lowered, though it carried. "I married without love because I feared it," he said. "I believed control safer than devotion. I was wrong." Her breath caught, silent and involuntary. "I ask now," he said, "not for absolution, but for permission to stand beside you as you deserve." The presiding voice hesitated before responding, its authority diluted by what had already transpired. Judgment was postponed. Inquiry deferred. The assembly dispersed in subdued fragments, their appetites for scandal dulled by something they could not easily categorize. As they exited together, the Duke's hand hovered near hers, uncertain, waiting. She did not take it. Not yet. But she walked beside him, her steps unbowed, aware that the greatest test still waited beyond the chamber, where love, once named, demanded to be proven. The court released them not with approval but with uncertainty, a quieter punishment that followed them beyond marble halls and into open air. Outside, dawn had begun its pale negotiation with night, washing the city in muted silver. The Duchess paused on the steps, breathing deeply, as though testing whether the world had truly changed or merely shifted its weight. Behind her, the Duke waited, not assuming her presence, not commanding it, standing as a man newly conscious of distance and consequence. They returned to Ravenshollow without ceremony. The carriage moved through streets still damp from rain, wheels murmuring over stone, lanterns dimming as morning advanced. Within that enclosed space, silence returned, but it was altered, no longer imposed but shared, tentative and fragile. The Duke watched her hands folded in her lap, unadorned now, the emerald ring removed. He understood the message and accepted it without protest, knowing symbolism mattered as much as speech. Days passed with deliberate quiet. The household adjusted subtly, sensing change without understanding it. Invitations dwindled, alliances recalculated, whispers replaced by cautious observation. Power, once unquestioned, now carried consequence. The Duke met it with unflinching resolve, attending councils, answering inquiries, relinquishing certain privileges without complaint. He did not speak of sacrifice, but she saw it in the lines at his mouth, the fatigue he no longer disguised, the humility that followed him like a shadow. She, too, changed. Freed from the immediate glare of judgment, she allowed herself to inhabit Ravenshollow not as ornament but as presence. She spoke with stewards, listened to tenants, walked halls once avoided. The estate responded, slowly, as though recognizing a steadier hand. She did not seek gratitude. Purpose was sufficient, and dignity reclaimed itself through action rather than declaration. One evening, as firelight gathered in the drawing-room and rain returned softly to the windows, he spoke first. "I cannot undo what I withheld," he said. "But I will not pretend it did not wound." His voice carried no defense, only fact. She listened, her expression calm, though something within her softened, imperceptibly, like ice loosening its grip. She replied not with forgiveness, but with truth. "I did not need reverence," she said. "Only recognition." The simplicity of it struck him harder than accusation. He nodded, absorbing the lesson without resistance, understanding that love demanded attention before devotion. In the weeks that followed, he learned restraint of a different kind. He asked rather than assumed. He listened without planning reply. He defended her presence openly, not as extension of his name, but as her own authority. Society observed from a cautious distance, uncertain how to categorize a duke who bowed only once yet never forgot how it felt, who chose partnership over command and humility over dominance. Their intimacy grew not through grand gestures, but through patience. A shared walk at dusk. A conversation unguarded by witnesses. The space between them narrowed gradually, earned rather than seized. She tested his consistency. He endured it willingly, understanding trust was not reclaimed through declaration alone but through repetition, accountability, and care. There were setbacks. Doubts returned on quieter nights. The weight of expectation lingered like an old ache. Yet each time uncertainty surfaced, it was met not with withdrawal, but with presence. He learned to remain when retreat tempted him most. She learned to hope without surrendering herself. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, affection took shape not as spectacle but as shelter, teaching them that healing was not absolution but perseverance. One night, under a sky cleared of clouds, she returned the emerald ring to his palm. "Not as obligation," she said, "but as choice." His fingers closed around it, not triumphantly, but reverently. He did not place it back upon her hand. Instead, he waited, honoring the moment with restraint, allowing her agency to remain intact. When at last she reached for him, it was without ceremony. Her touch was light, deliberate, grounding. He met it fully, the weight of his devotion no longer hidden behind protocol or fear. In that moment, the balance shifted irrevocably. The marriage, once forged of necessity, became something living, shaped by will and courage. The world would remember the scandal, the bow, the astonishment of power humbled. But within Ravenshollow, a quieter history began to take root, written in mutual regard and earned tenderness. And though the future remained uncertain, they faced it not as Duke and Duchess bound by contract, but as two souls who had chosen, at last, to stand together, unafraid of love's cost, ready to shape what came next.